Hello everyone and welcome to the latest This Week in the Field with the Handyman in the Field. I'm Dustin, and this week we had a pretty decently sized week. We completed a number of projects that we've started up recently, and we also have some other projects that were kind of one and dones but added to a decent weekly total. So we'll get into the total later on. We also have a number of new developments. Obviously, this is the second week we have employees. This is also about the halfway point for my business coaching class that I'm in. We've got more business networking group updates. So there's a lot of different things to talk about. So as usual, let's jump into the jobs for the week, starting off on Monday. So Monday, I did not have my employees working with me. I instead had a job that was for an existing customer. I've worked with this customer multiple times in the past. They had just basically a punch list of different things that needed to be completed. There was a variety of different things. One of them was a shower cartridge needed to be replaced. There was a light fixture, a couple of light fixtures that needed to be replaced. Just updated, things like that. There was a door adjustment, caulking around the kitchen sink. So there's a variety of different things. I'll shoot some before and after photos here of the different things as I continue on. But this customer, they reach out. It's typically like either 3 to 4 times per year, depending on the nature of what they need. And they have a variety of different things. They always try to compile a list of stuff together that needs to be done. But specifically, I've done everything from like replacing toilets, caulking in the shower. I've done slow drains, faucet repairs. I've done a little bit of painting, a variety of different things. Mostly, it's like it's exactly what you think when you think of a punch list. It's that kind of work, and that is very consistently what the type of work that I'm doing there is. It's a variety of different things, and typically in most situations I'm there for a good chunk of the day. The only additional thing this time around was this customer back in like April requested me to come out to take a look at something that they believed was leaking. They had an issue with their roof, specifically around a skylight, and they were having a roofer come out, and before the roofer came out, they wanted to know from the inside if there was any issues or visible areas where you could see water damage. So that way, when they did the inspection on the roof from the outside, they could address certain areas based off of where they saw anything from the inside. When I went there back in April, there was nothing. So basically all it was more of like a diagnostic visit. I took pictures of the skylight so that they could see. I honestly believe the spots that they were seeing were actually caused by humidity in the bathroom itself. The vent fan, it vented into the attic because the house is that old, but the issue is that the vent fan, it was venting. I don't think it was pulling enough air, to be honest. And I suggested swapping out the fan if it consistently was a problem. But for the most part, it hasn't been a problem, so it wasn't something that they needed to address. Obviously, there was a lot of miscellaneous electrical stuff and plumbing stuff that was involved in this, and because of that, there was a little bit of an upcharge over my normal hourly rate for the punch list, internally hourly rate, of course, because we've discussed that. So that total for that job was $965. That included that visit from before that I never charged them for that, back when I originally was there, because I knew eventually I would be coming back because they just had me out regularly. They were having some company come in from out of town, and that's why one of the reasons they wanted to get a lot of this stuff taken care of. Immediately after that, I drove to a member of the LaTip group, and in that group, there was a member who had a kitchen island. They recently had their countertops redone. They were getting a new countertop for the kitchen island, but they want to rebuild the kitchen island to be more useful. Higher, standard, counter height, but also more storage available. So they had me come out. I took some pictures. For the most part, I used ChatGPT to come up with the best, options based off of stock cabinets, because we're They're trying to keep the costs low, and there's a certain level of, if we can use stock cabinets, that would be ideal. So I gave them 3 different options. To be honest, the most expensive option that I gave them is probably the best option, just because it gets them exactly what they're looking for, but it also utilizes the space in a way where they have plenty of storage space. So there's that. I was able, because of ChatGPT, I was able to get that estimate put together pretty quickly and give them 3 options when I had my meeting on Wednesday. So hopefully, not hopefully, but there's different options. I hope that they go with the more expensive option just because it'll look nicer and there'll be more to it. So there's that. So that was all that we had on Monday. Like I said, my employees didn't work with me, mostly because that punch list that I had on Monday was, for the most part, it was pretty straightforward, and there really wasn't a need for an extra body. Jumping over to Tuesday, one of the employees was with me early in the morning. We had a variety of, again, it was a real small punch list, like a couple hours punch list. This customer, we went to her house, I think it was like 2 weeks ago. I believe, I'm looking at my notes, I can't see it, but I think it was like 2 weeks ago I went there, and she had some areas that need to be caulked. One of the areas that was of concern was she has wood baseboards that, because the wall is just a slightly wavy and the wood might be slightly not, completely straight, there's these gaps. If it was white trim, you could easily just put some caulk and call it a day. When it's wood trim, you can't really do that the same way. So what you end up having to do is filling the gaps with caulk, keeping it off of the trim as best as possible. And then you need to paint it the color of the wall in order for it to all blend together. It's basically just like closing off those gaps with caulk, but making it in a way where it's not as noticeable from far away. Most people aren't getting up close and realizing that there's a gap there. Once you get the caulk there, it kind of just, it prevents the shadow from the light showing, and that's what you actually see, the gap from afar. So there's a couple different spots. One was alongside a toilet in the master bathroom. The other one was next to the shower. The wood itself had actually gotten wet over years and actually has warped and curved. And there really wasn't a perfect scenario for that, but the least expensive option was to actually crack the wood so that you could get the wood to slightly bend back in place, fill the crack that you now have with a clear caulking that blends in because it's clear. Fill the caulk on the backside, paint it. So for the most part, I think it turned out pretty well. The customer was extremely ecstatic about how it looked, and they were very happy because it was something that was an eyesore to them, because it's directly across from the toilet and it's right next to the door where you walk in, so you see it a lot. So there was that. There was a picture that needed to be hung in the master bathroom. There was a picture or a piece of art that needed to be hung on the outside of or in the backyard on a wooden trellis or privacy wall. It was a wooden privacy wall, I guess is the best way to phrase that. There was some caulking between her patio and the foundation of the house. I'll be honest, this really wasn't necessarily needed. It was more of for her, it's more peace of mind. It's a very odd area too, because it's underneath a windowsill. She wanted it filled in because I think she has had issues with bugs in the past, and she was convinced that was an issue. The problem is it's just basically a big old gap between the existing patio and the foundation. There's just a gap. You can certainly fill it over time. Shifting is obviously going to occur between the seasons. So it was more of like a peace of mind. That's what she wanted to be done for. There was also around her front door, there was grout that had been chipped out over the years. So we just needed to dress that up a little bit nicer. We used caulk to go over it, chipped out the loose grout, and just used caulking there. So that way, as it shifts, it's not, the grout isn't continuously cracking. And then the only thing that she added on was she wanted me to drill a couple holes, which of course I didn't have my rotary hammer drill, or a normal drill for that matter. So I was using one of my drills and the bits that aren't the best bits to be used for that drilling into brick. managed to get it done. In the process, the bits that I was using, they got so hot that they could easily melt plastic. So yeah, it wasn't ideal, but you got to make it work when they ask for something like that, because it was something minor and it would have not been beneficial to have to come back. So that job got done. $375 was the total for that job. Like I said, one of the employees was with me. He was basically just running out to the truck to get, to swap things out for the next thing on the punch list before we moved on. And then at one point I actually had him run to Home Depot to get a paintbrush, because I didn't have a small paintbrush. I needed a really small, like, artist paintbrush to do this area by the caulk, or to paint the caulk that we had filled in. And I didn't want a giant brush, because that would just get it all over the baseboards. So $375. After that, we actually had two small things happen at the exact same time. So the other two employees, they met the third employee at the shop, and then from the shop they left to go to a house that we did about a month ago. It was a property turnover. Turns out it was one that we did, like, the vanities, and we replaced the bottom of the cabinet in the kitchen. We did carpeting. That was and there was a bunch of painting that got done in the bedrooms. But the realtor had not been to the property, even though we did the work almost a month ago. And he went out there, I think it was either late last week or early this week, and basically reached out to the property manager who hired us and said, oh, the property's dirty. Now, I was confused, because we cleaned the property. We didn't scrub the property, but we cleaned the property, in the sense of, like, all the floors were vacuumed for the new carpet. We vacuumed, mopped, or vacuum swept and mopped all the hard floors. The bathrooms were pretty much, clean to a point, because we replaced the vanities, and we painted. So a lot of that stuff got wiped down. Now, to be fair, the shower area did not get wiped down, but there was just, some minor dust. There was a cobweb that got brought to our attention in a space that we weren't painting, so I didn't necessarily see that. And then the laundry area, which I also didn't see, had some buildup of just gunk on the baseboards. So those were just, like, minor little things, but again, I can see from the perspective, but again, I wasn't hired to clean the property. I thought that the property manager had a cleaner that they use, because I know in a lot of cases for different turnovers, you have to clean the property, and then you charge the tenants who are moving out if it's an extensive clean. I don't know if they don't have a cleaner, but I probably need to get a cleaner on, not necessarily retainer. I'm saying retainer is like more of like need to have a cleaner on hand, not necessarily, at my beck and call on retainer. Mostly because a cleaner would probably be cheaper to have a property cleaned than if I did it myself or my employees were doing it. Also, if we got to a unit that was in really bad shape, like the oven and the stovetop was in really bad shape, the toilets really needed to be scrubbed down, I don't even have some of the stuff to do that type of work. We have a whole cabinet of cleaning supplies and cleaning tools and things like that, but I don't personally want to clean my own stovetop, much less, get paid to clean a stovetop. And in some cases, some of these rentals, they're really bad. So I probably need to find a cleaner. I have a couple of names from some people locally that I found on Facebook that I need to reach out to and see if I can create a relationship with them, so that I do have a cleaner that I can use in these cases. So that way we can get, this stuff done as soon as possible, and it's not necessarily reliant on me. In some cases, turnovers just require minor repairs and mostly cleaning. So if I could get the minor repairs done, have the cleaner come in afterwards or the next day, we can knock it out a lot quicker. And in most cases, the cleaner is going to be a lot less expensive than paying my guys to do it or having myself do it, where we could be on a different job site making more money. So that's the only thing. So they started there. While they were there, I went to an estimate that was literally like 5 minutes away. Customer wants a doorbell chime. She has her doorbell chime intercom installed. She wants it replaced with a ring. doorbell, and we were trying to come up with the best scenario of what she could do. So it ended up, the chime itself just needs to be taken out and then covered with something. So she had to come up with something to cover it with, like a piece of art or an address plaque or something like that. And then there was another wired doorbell that does work, so we're going to use that for the ring, and then we'll be set with that. I needed to test the existing intercom to see if it even had power. It didn't, which explained why there was an additional doorbell. But it's interesting because the additional doorbell she didn't even notice until I was already out there to take a look at it. So I did send out that estimate. However, she said that she wasn't expecting it to be as high, so I have to respond to that. But the issue with stuff like that is that there is a certain amount of electrical involved. There is obviously setting up the ring. I'm not going to sit here and say it's super, it's not an easy job. It is a relatively easy job, but you could run into issues. And the other issue was making sure that the old one is properly capped and covered, and so that it doesn't have any, there's nothing that gets inside of it. The last thing you want is a wasp nest that ends up getting built inside the old spot. So there's that. So then I headed back over to the cleaning job. We got the cleaning job done. We charged $225 for the cleaning, and everything was set. The realtor, I did get in touch with the realtor ahead of time to find out if what they specifically wanted, and haven't heard back. So either he hasn't gone over there or everything was good to go. So there's that. So then we jump over to Wednesday, and we've got the LATIP meeting in the morning, which, to be honest, there really wasn't any developments. Some of the one of the things that I've noticed from dealing with some of the people in LATIP is that when I've priced things out, it is very clear that they were not expecting things to be as expensive as they were. I don't know if that derives from the fact that I am a handyman and they're thinking to themselves that this is going to be cheap work because it's a handyman, or if they just don't have any expectations of how expensive construction is, because there really isn't a lot of tradespeople / construction people in this group. There's, like I said before, there's a painter, and I know he charges a reasonable amount, but I don't know how often he's actually painting people's houses because he's typically very booked up. On the flip side, there is a HVAC guy who also, he repairs appliances. And the thing is, he works with a lot of them on a very regular basis, but a lot of what he does is preventative maintenance on the air conditioners and, repairs on appliances. He's very reasonably priced. I just recently used him at my own residence to do preventative maintenance on my 2 air conditioners, and it was relatively inexpensive. However, I do know that it's about the standard price for the area of what he charged is about the same exact price. So it's not as if he's undercharging, but he's not overcharging. So it's like he's right in where he needs to be for something like that. But the problem is that, I don't know how much if he had to replace an entire air conditioner, I don't know how much that would cost. And I don't know how many people in the group have had something like that come up. So as a perfect example, the kitchen island, the project was like $1,200 for the premium version. That's with them buying the cabinets. And she thought, based off of a comment she made, it was very clear that she thought it was expensive. There was some other project that I priced out, which was installing 2 storm doors. The storm doors individually were almost $600 a piece. And the additional work that needed to be done was not just installing a storm door, but there's a track that needs to be removed, and there's no way to remove it without having the exterior door removed or cutting it so that you can get the frame of the new storm door flush. There's a lot of work that goes into cutting a metal frame off without damaging anything or, causing any issues. So for the quote for that, I think it was around $1,200 too. And that, I got the impression based off of a response that was extremely high. There was another project that we quoted out, a bunch of exterior trim repair. That job was not cheap. With materials, it was like $5,400, but that was almost $3,000 of that is materials. It's like about a week job, a week-long job for us. And again, it came across as like, oh yeah, that one's not exactly the same. That was more of a, hey, we just need to make sure we have the money to do it kind of situation. So I did not get the impression, I just don't think he had the impression that it was going to be as expensive when he asked for the estimate. That said, it is very clear that some people have a very different perception of how much things are, and then other people, it's not even a question. Just a couple of weeks ago, I did a mailbox for one of the members. Didn't even ask me for a price, just told me to get it done. And I got it done and didn't say a word about the price. Or actually, I did give him the price ahead of time because I don't like when people say just do it because, they might have a different idea of how much it costs. But when I gave him the price, he didn't have any issues with it. I mean, obviously, replacing a mailbox is a very different price than, a massive siding or a massive trim repair across your entire house. So all of that said, there was a lot of... I have to figure out our best way of like going about trying to communicate this. When I first got into the group, it was very clear that I wanted to make sure there wasn't the perception that I was a cheap company, because I think Handyman, as I've said in other videos that we've talked about, if you go back, the word handyman sometimes has a specific connotation with it, and it comes off as it could be, cheap. And that's not what I am. I'm not cheap. I'm trying to run a professional business. I'm trying to expand and have more people so that we can get work done faster. I'm trying to make sure that everything is up to par as far as, we pay payroll taxes, we pay income tax, we have insurance, we have all of these things that, some companies do not have. Or I shouldn't say companies, some handymen do not have. And that's the problem. You really have to figure out a way of like communicating that, because I think that there's a lot of people's perception of handymen are, maybe $40 an hour, and that's going to get you the work you need to get done. And that's not what we are. I can't run a successful business charging those cheaper prices. I've learned that over my years of doing this. So outside of that, there really wasn't any new work that derived from that meeting, but that's okay, because I don't need new work every single time. After that, I immediately drove to a really small job. There was a coach light on the front of a house. It had broke. They needed it replaced. They already had the new fixture, so it was just swapping it out very quick. Now, the one thing that sucked, and this is just a situational thing because of what happened that day, it was hot. It was humid, super humid. I talked about this before, about how back in November, I started wearing work boots and khaki work pants to try to, give that more professional look. Well, the humidity this week was so bad that in one point at that specific job, I was outside standing in the sun for about 20 minutes. My legs were drenched. It looked like I had dipped myself in a pond because of how sweaty I was. So I got done with that job. That job was just $150. And then I had to run back to my house to change into some shorts because there was just no way that I was going to be able to make it in pants all day. So then we went from there. The employees met me at the next job site, which was, we were going back to the demo job. The demo job, I'll get to it, but on Wednesday, we basically started cutting all the drywall and started knocking all the drywall down, getting all the drywall just mounded up into piles. There's a lot of drywall, and started bagging up some of it. The dumpster was coming at some point, but I booked it to come on Thursday, but it was just whenever it got there. So we started doing the drywall, we started pulling some of the trim. We started to try to see how quickly the bar could come apart. So that was basically Wednesday. There was a lot of just, demo, just lots of demo. Thursday, I personally went back to the drywall job that we started last week, which was coming up behind the remediation company and doing the drywall. There's pictures here of what it looked like after the second visit, but the biggest thing is the humidity is still so bad that stuff's not drying as quickly as it should. So I knew that was going to happen, but I also did not want to be there, for an extensive amount of time waiting for the stuff that I was doing to dry. So I did a second coat. I'm going back for a third coat this week. We'll see what happens as far as whether the third coat's going to be enough or if we're going to have to do more. But that's where we're at with that. So then I went from there, met the employees at the demo job again. One of the employees was off on Thursday and Friday for a family thing, and the other two were with me. So we went back to the demo job. This day, we were basically bagging up all the drywall. All the stuff that we had taken out, we were bagging it up in trash bags, taping them up. So that way, once the dumpster showed up, we could carry it through the house and get it out of the house into the dumpster. This house is on a big piece of property. And in order to get it out, you're kind of walking, I don't know how exactly far. If I had to guess, it would probably be like 100, maybe 200 feet from the front door to where the dumpster is. And then you still have to go up a flight of stairs and through part of the house to get out the front door. So we needed to, the whole goal was the dumpster wasn't there. We didn't know when it was coming. So we wanted to just get everything cleaned up as much as possible, get the bar taken apart, get the sink taken out, get all of this stuff done so that way we could so when the dumpster was there, we could start getting the stuff in. When you get the dumpster, at least the dumpster company that I use, you can have the dumpster for up to 7 days. That's included in the cost. I want it to be in and out as quick as possible because a customer doesn't want the dumpster sitting there that long anyway. That said, the dumpster ended up getting delivered Tuesday, but it was after we left because there was some storms that rolled in. And we didn't want to be at the house when the storms rolled in, much less be trying to run through the rain to get to the truck. So what we ended up doing was we bagged up pretty much everything, swept up a good majority of it. The one thing that we needed to do was wherever we cut off drywall, they used adhesive to get the drywall to stick to the studs. So we had to chisel out, the globs of adhesive, make sure all the nails were pulled. Because they use nails. There were some areas they use screws, but mostly they use nails, which is something I haven't seen in a while. And then the bar. It was just basically getting that bar dismantled and getting it into pieces. And then that was basically what we did on Thursday. So when we walked in on Friday, so that was the end of the trip. We ended up leaving slightly early, just because of the storms that were rolling in. Friday, we went back right away in the morning, started real early with the two employees. And basically the job for that day was to get the majority of the garbage into the dumpster. I don't have a lot of experience of how long something that's gonna take. I can give a rough estimate if I take a bag myself up to the dumpster and I get back and then I count how many trips I'm going to have to do. I could get a general idea of how long that's going to take. But to be honest, I just don't have enough experience to know how long that's going to take. I was thinking it was going to take a while. We had close to 40 to 45 bags of debris that needed to get taken out to the dumpster. We had probably about 20 rolls of carpet, that's about 4 or 5 feet long. We had a couple of different cabinets. We had some bigger pieces of wood. We had piles of 2x4s from the bar we disassembled. So a lot of that stuff is just, I don't know how long it's going to take. The other thing we had to do was we still had to remove the insulation from the wall cavities, finish up chiseling out the adhesive and the removing of the rest of the screws. We had to do a final cleanup, remove the studs that were they cut out the tiles so that they could get the studs, the bottom framing for the bar on the ground. Makes perfect sense. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. It can't go on top of the tile. You're just going to shatter the tile if you ram set into it. But we needed to get those out, and there really wasn't an easy way because they were already recessed with tile on either side. So we basically had to cut it and then try to pry out the pieces, and that was another thing we had to do. And then, like I said, it was just general making sure everything got cleaned up. So it actually went relatively fast. The dumpster was on site. We ended up getting all of the carpet, the excess wood cabinets into the dumpster within like 30 minutes. To get the rest of the bags then we took a small break and worked on getting the insulation out of the cavities and getting the rest of the stuff cleaned up. Once we got done with that, we worked on the bags, and it was probably like each of us had to take maybe 15 trips up with a bag or 2 bags. These bags were pretty heavy. I mean, most of them were probably like 70 to 80 pounds because they were just filled with drywall. We can't walk through the house with all this drywall, so we had it all bagged up so it could go straight into the dumpster without making a mess throughout the house. We had paper down on the floor, the hardwood floor on the main floor that we had to walk over, as well as the deck that getting off the deck, we had paper going there too. It actually worked out perfectly because this was probably the only day of the week that it wasn't super humid and it wasn't super hot. It was probably like 75, but the humidity level was very low, which was nice. So it was actually, not horrible getting all this stuff. We were able to get all the bags into the trash can everything was pretty much out of the basement, and all we had left was to clean, do a final walkthrough to make sure we get the nails and get the little pieces of the bar pried up. That was all done before noon, which was like within 3 hours of us being there. So it went incredibly fast compared to what I was anticipating. I was thinking it was going to take a lot longer. It didn't. We went to lunch, came back from lunch, and we ended up we got the bar up pretty quickly because we stopped at Tractor Supply, which is a local store. They carry some tools. It was just the closest place. I have pry bars that are sitting here, but of course they were not with me. So we ended up getting a bigger pry bar or a crowbar, a much larger crowbar than even one I had because I didn't want to get something that I already had. Able to get the bar pieces up. We were able to clean everything up. Everything was done, and we were out of there within a couple of hours. So that job got completed. That was $3,800. I did have the customer give me a deposit for $1,000 initially. That was mostly to cover the dumpster. There really wasn't a ton of material, so this job is mostly just straight labor. We are going back to that customer's house for some other projects in the very near future, including this week. But the biggest thing was getting this taken care of because the basement just has had a mildewy smell present because it's just never been able to completely dry out. There may be more future work as far as like what he ends up wanting to do with the space. I know he doesn't use the basement right now. It's more of like a get rid of the smell and dry everything out. And that's the focus at this moment. So that job, like I said, $3,800. So before we dive into the total for the week, let's talk about a couple of other things that happened. I did send out 3 estimates this specific week. Out of the 3 estimates that I sent out, I had 5 come back approved. Now, I know that the math doesn't math there, but out of the 3 that I sent, 2 of those got approved, but then there was 3 additional ones that I had sent out a couple weeks ago, or in some cases, some of these were sent out almost a month ago, and they got approved, and that work is getting done. Interestingly, I had 2 customers who I had sent estimates to over 3 weeks ago in both cases, and they both came back and said, hey, when are you going to do the work? And I was confused because I had sent them the estimates and they did not approve them. Once I said, we sent an estimate, they went back in their email, realized they messed up, and approved it immediately. So it's another one of those things where I know my software, once I send out an estimate, I think it reaches out 2 days and then 5 days. And I don't think it reaches out again after that. But you don't know if your email's going into their spam folder. So you need to be on the lookout for something like that. I'm thinking about following up with some of the customers where I was pretty confident when I did an estimate that they were going to do the work, following up with a text message maybe. My software does allow me to send a link via text to the estimate so they can approve it via text. They click on the link and it just brings them to the same thing that the email would. But some customers, they have emails that they could get like 50 emails a day and it just gets lost in the shuffle. So you got to be aware of that. These jobs, I was confident in both of them getting, completed or approved, but they didn't, and I was surprised that they didn't. But in some cases, it was clearly just they got lost in the shuffle. And sometimes I'm not super great about going back and looking at some of these projects that I had quoted out to pay attention if the customer actually saw saw the actual estimate. My software allows me to see if they've opened up the email or if they have viewed the estimate. However, I don't always check that until about 30 days has passed, because at that point I start archiving the estimates so that because they're out of date. I always say that the estimates are good for about 30 days and then may need to be reevaluated based off of, the market. So I typically archive them after 30 days if they're not approved. But that's when I look and see if they were approved. At that point, it's already been 30 days to send them a follow-up and say, hey, real quick, it's been a month since I sent this out. Do you want to do this? It seems like it's too late. So I need to probably change the scenario where an email or a text message goes out maybe after 2 days if they haven't approved the estimates. So that way we can see if there's another way of them seeing it. The issue, of course, is if they don't have a phone that receives text messages, that's not going to work. But that is probably like only 5% of my customer base. So there's that. My coaching call this week was very interesting because they had a bookkeeper. He's a handyman, but he's also a bookkeeper. And he was talking about QuickBooks and numbers and things like that. And to be honest, the way he had his QuickBooks set up, I almost wish I had QuickBooks and I had it set up the same way, because I would manage it the exact same way he does. Of course, I just recently added a software thing on for my CRM that does the bookkeeping, but I don't feel like they're actually doing anything, and it's probably cheaper to have QuickBooks. So in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking, do I just end up eating the cost of that bookkeeping thing, canceling it because it's not performing and doing anything that I wanted it to do, and then just go to the route of using QuickBooks, having this guy potentially set up QuickBooks for me so that way I can monitor things. One thing that he had that he monitors that I thought was really, really smart was he actually monitors the different sources. As far as sources of revenue, he's created categories that focus on what the jobs are that he actually does. So carpentry work, punch lists, plumbing work, electrical work. He focuses on these different categories so that he can figure out, one, what he's making the most money from when it comes to a job. Two, he associates his costs rather than individual jobs. He associates the costs to that category, so that way he can figure out which category is the most profitable. And honestly, I loved the way he had it. As someone who loves paying attention to numbers and enjoys the admin side of the business, it was great. And I will be, like I said, I'm being very honest here. I took a lot of time setting up that other stupid bookkeeping thing, but the problem that I've had with it is that they are reconciling things on their end. The bookkeeper, there's supposed to be a actual bookkeeper who's managing the books. I've noticed that there's weeks that go by that nothing's happening, and then I have two options. I either wait until the end of the month when they look at everything and they try to figure out where everything goes, which is not going to sync up with necessarily where it all goes, or I have to go there individually and go week by week to reconcile things. If that's what happens, what am I paying them for? They're basically going in and just hitting a button that says, locking in the books for the month. So I'm starting to question whether or not it's a good idea to continue that. I'm pretty sure that something like QuickBooks would be cheaper. I don't remember for sure. I have to look into the cost of it. But if I could get that guy to set up QuickBooks for me so that it's set up in a way where it's exactly the way he's doing it, that's exactly the way I would want to monitor everything. And then once it's already set up, you just have to go in there and actually actively, reconcile things, which I don't have an issue reconciling the stuff. Of course, the problem is going back to the beginning of the year and getting all of that reconciled is going to be an absolute pain in the butt. The other side of it is I could just keep my stuff the way it is for now and then next year focus on dealing with the individual categories instead of doing it by job, because the categories I think are going to be more profitable than the job. I don't necessarily need to know how profitable an individual job is. I just need to know how profitable that job type is. The job itself is it's going to fluctuate from customer to customer, so it's not necessarily going to matter. I like the way he approached it, and I'm contemplating on just eating the cost of what I did before, the time and cost, because there was a lot of time that went into getting that to work, and then figuring out some way of having him get this set up for me so that way it's done. The only catch is I have to confirm that the bookkeeping thing that I did, I can still cancel, because I don't want to be in a scenario where I can't cancel that. I'm pretty sure I can cancel anytime. I just have to review the initial stuff. And to be honest, like, I need to just see if that's possible, but that's probably my better option, because the majority of people use QuickBooks. The majority of people are using, if you have it all set up in QuickBooks, you can see that. The other thing that I'm never going to see from the software that I'm currently using compared to QuickBooks is the projections. And that's something that is going to be more important, especially when I have another tech that I bring on board. So these are things I have to work on. Of course, there are things that I have to deal with when it comes to, managing the business, figuring out the best ways of going forward with certain things. It's very clear that the software that I'm working on, because it's a beta, they're not thinking about certain things. Like, I like the idea of someone manually checking your books. I don't like the idea of someone manually checking your books, but at the same time, you still have to put all of the information in. Sure, the information is being ported over, but they're not actually doing anything with that. The information that I received, which was that they were closing out books 5 days, within the end of the month, I don't even know what that means, because closing out books, I could still always go back and edit it. I don't even know what that phrase means, closing out the books for the month. And they haven't done a great job of addressing some of my concerns. If anything, they should have created something where it was very similar to, they should have created something very similar to QuickBooks, and then just added the actual manual bookkeeper into it in order to manage it. And that's not what they've created. So I don't know that it's going to be beneficial long-term for something like that. So going over the total for the week, we were at $5,515 for the week. The other thing that happened this week was my employees got their first paychecks. My first paycheck is coming this upcoming week for my salary. So at the moment, we're in a very good spot. I'm trying to make sure that the way I track everything for as far as the jobs and my income and things like that, I have a better idea of projections, so that way I know how far I am from how I need to be monitoring the actual work that I have for the jobs, and making sure that I have enough money coming in. Because the thing is, it's great when you have these jobs like the demo job, which was $3,800. It is going to be, I know it's a profitable job, but the problem is you do have to have some time where you have cash reserves. Cash reserves are a big deal, because in this case, yes, he did give me a deposit of about almost 25% down. However, the deposit does not cover everything. It does need to cover the dumpster. The dumpster gets charged right away. If you run the dumpster at the very end of the job, you obviously have some time if you're using a credit card to pay for it, where you don't have to worry about any interest. The issue, of course, is that you still have to pay those employees. And in some cases, you could end up running into a problem where you don't have the money to cover those employees. If my pay period ended that past week, at this point, the customer has been invoiced, but he has yet to pay. He'll probably pay on Monday. It may take 3 or 4 days before the money clears to be able to go into my account. If the pay period for last week ended now and I had no cash reserves whatsoever, what's going to happen is that my payroll is going to run on Wednesday. When my payroll runs on Wednesday, it's going to pull the money out of my account to pay those employees for that job that we didn't get paid for yet, because the money's still processing. So this is something that I've been paying attention to as we go, because it wouldn't be as big of a deal if I didn't have 3 employees. If I only had 1 employee, it would probably be much more manageable as far as like figuring out the cash reserves thing. And it probably won't be as big of a deal when I only have 1 tech compared to having 3 helpers. The issue becomes that I need to make sure that overall there's always money there. Now, I had some reserves from before I had them on board, and I need to just keep making sure that I've got enough money coming in. So sporadically adding into these smaller jobs, the job of, that recent job that I had this week of the punch list 965 and the other punch list 375, that almost adds up to the entire payroll for an entire week for the 3 of them. So that's something that I have to be careful on, is I need to make sure that I have some smaller jobs that are bringing money in order to make sure that I'm covering what I need, while the bigger jobs may take a little bit longer for one, payment to be collected, and also payment to come in. For working for the property manager, they sometimes take 2-3 weeks to pay depending on the scenario. So we have to make sure that we have the money ahead of time to pay the employees, even though I might not have the money. That's one of the reasons why so many people talk about collecting deposits. That is not a mentality that I have when it comes to this, because unless I have a large amount of costs associated with expenses, specifically materials and things like that, there's not really a necessity for collecting deposits. That's not to say that I don't figure out ways of having milestone payments when it comes to certain projects, because I think that's important to have, especially on the bigger projects. One of the estimates that just got approved is that porch enhancement job that's kind of been floating out there for about a month. That estimate got finalized. They approved it. That's going to be probably at least 2, maybe 3 weeks come July that will be there. And then I'll obviously be sporadically adding some other things in. That job is big enough where it's going to have milestone payments. But that's the thing, is like, you have to make sure you have enough money. You don't want to be in a scenario. I've heard horror stories of guys who are like struggling week to week to make sure that they have enough money to cover payroll. I don't ever want to be in that scenario. I don't ever want to be in a scenario where there's not enough money to cover the payroll for obviously my employees, but also to cover my salary that I'm needing to make sure that I have in order to keep going too. So those are things you got to keep in mind that I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to when they first start having employees. Have some cash reserves. I've heard have 2 months of money left, 2 months of what you would have to pay them as a cash reserve, or at the very least a month. Again, it just depends on how you're collecting your money. If your primary people are property managers and it does take you some time to get paid, you probably do need to have a couple of months of pay in order to be able to make sure you can afford them. But yeah, so with all that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for all the new subscribers that have come on board. I have gotten a couple of more comments. I would love to do a Q&A coming up here very soon. If you guys have questions that you'd like to have answered, please leave them in the comment section. I do have a week at the end of June that I'm going to be out of town. And if I don't I won't obviously have a This Week in the Field that week, but if I get enough questions, I can do a question and answer session that will, play into the same time frame as these episodes that release on Monday. I'll have a Thursday episode regardless, but if I don't have enough questions or answers, we're just going to take a week off, because I want to make sure that I have that, that nice little buffer area of making sure that I have episodes come out in a timely manner. So with that being said, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you're listening to this via podcast format, or you didn't know it was available in podcast format, we are available on YouTube Music as a podcast feed. So take a look at that. You could listen to me talk if you don't care about the before and after pictures and you don't want to look at my beautiful face. You could always listen to a podcast form in your vehicle while you're driving around. In addition to that, like I said, leave comments, like the video if you do like it. I appreciate that as well. And then share the video with other people that you think might get something out of it. So with all of that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. We'll see you guys next time.